Here's a question for you. What was it really like to grow up in Great Britain during the 1980s? While American kids were watching Knight Rider and eating Pop Rocks, British children lived in a completely different universe. We had our own peculiar playground culture where British Bulldog could leave you in the nurse's office. Yet here's what nobody tells you about 80s Britain. We were simultaneously living in the future and the past. While Silicon Valley was birthing the digital age, British kids were still playing conkers with horse chestnuts on strings, but we also had the most advanced home computer gaming scene in the world. This paradox created the most bizarrely wonderful childhood experience that shaped an entire generation in ways that still baffle Americans today. Our British schools in the 1980s. Imagine Hogwarts, but with more violence and worse food. The playground wasn't just a place to play, it was a gladiatorial arena where ancient games met modern brutality. British Bulldog was technically banned in most schools, which naturally meant everyone played it constantly. For our American friends, imagine Red Rover crossed with rugby, but with absolutely no rules except don't die. The game involved one person in the middle trying to tackle runners to the ground. And I mean properly tackle, none of this tag nonsense. By 1985, most schools had banned it after too many broken bones, but we just renamed it Bull Rush and carried on. The teachers knew, but as long as nobody actually died, they'd just smoke their cigarettes in the staff room and pretend not to notice. Speaking of controversial, corporal punishment was still legal in British state schools until 1986. That's right, teachers could literally hit you with a cane or slipper. That's a gym shoe for Americans. The last legal caning in a British state school happened in 1987, though some private schools kept it going until 1998. Imagine explaining that to today's kids. Now let's talk about school dinners. And I use the term food loosely. Spam fritters, a deep-fried slice of processed meat that was approximately 34% pork and 66% pure grease, became the unlikely symbol of British school cuisine. We also had the infamous shaped turkey drummers, processed meat moulded to vaguely resemble a drumstick. Jamie Oliver would have had a heart attack if he'd seen what we consumed daily in the 80s. They came with instant mashed potatoes that had the consistency of wallpaper paste and vegetables boiled until they surrendered. But here's what made British school food unique. The dinner ladies. These weren't just food servers, they were local mums who knew everyone's business and weren't afraid to give you a clip round the ear if you didn't eat your soggy cabbage. They'd pile your plate high with stodge and say things like, "You'll eat that if you know what's good for you, young man." It was simultaneously terrifying and comforting. If you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, or horrified by what British kids endured, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Because coming up, I'm going to reveal the one toy that divided the entire nation and caused actual fights between working class and middle class kids. Plus, you won't believe what we considered health food in the 80s. Here's something that might shock Americans. In 1980s Britain, your toys literally defined your social class. While American kids all seemed to have the same Transformers and G.I. Joes, British playgrounds were segregated by plastic. The working class kids had Action Force, our version of G.I. Joe, but somehow more violent, while middle class children played with Playmobil. But the real controversy, the Rubik's Cube riots of 1981. When this Hungarian puzzle hit British shores, it created genuine chaos. Shops were ransacked, parents fought in queues, and there was even a black market in school playgrounds. My mate Kevin's dad bought 50 cubes and sold them for triple the price. It was like the PS5 shortage, but with more perms and shoulder pads. But nothing, and I mean nothing, divided British kids like the computer wars. You were either a Spectrum kid or a Commodore 64 kid, and this wasn't just about gaming. It was tribal warfare. The BBC Micro kids, they were the posh ones whose parents thought computers should be educational. These machines shaped British gaming culture in ways that still influence the industry today. While American kids were playing Nintendo, we were typing in 500 lines of basic code from magazines just to play a game where a square jumped over other squares. British sweets in the 80s were basically chemical weapons disguised as confectionery. Space dust, our Pop Rocks, was rumoured to make your stomach explode if you drank Coke with it. Complete nonsense, but every kid believed it. But here's the truly controversial bit. Many of our favourite sweets were accidentally teaching us to gamble. Bazooka Joe bubblegum came with points you could save for prizes. Fruit machines were in every chip shop, and even our chocolate bars had competitions. The government later realised we were essentially training a generation of gambling addicts, but in the 80s, nobody cared. The real scandal? Pacers. These mint sweets were rumoured to contain chlorophyll, and kids believed they'd turn your poo green. Whether true or not, every British kid in 1983 was checking the toilet after eating them. They disappeared mysteriously in the mid-80s, leading to conspiracy theories that persist today. While American kids had proper BMX tracks and organised competitions, British BMX culture was pure anarchy. We built illegal dirt tracks on waste ground, usually on top of old Victorian rubbish dumps that were probably leaking toxic waste. Health and safety? Never heard of her. The Rally Burner was the king of bikes. If you had one, you were basically playground royalty. But here's what they don't tell you. British BMX culture was accidentally inclusive. Unlike sports that required expensive equipment or club memberships, any kid with a bike could join in. We had girls doing backflips off sketchy plywood ramps in 1984, years before anyone talked about gender equality in sports. Still with me? Brilliant. Don't forget to like this video if you're remembering your own sketchy BMX jumps. And stick around because the TV section coming up reveals the one British show that was so disturbing. It gave an entire generation nightmares. And it was meant for children. British children's television in the 1980s was basically psychological warfare. While American kids got the warm fuzzies from Mr. Rogers, we had shows that seemed designed by people who actively hated children. Take The Adventure Game, a show where celebrities were trapped on an alien planet and had to solve puzzles or be evaporated. The Vortex finale featured an invisible monster that moved one square at a time on a grid. Get caught? You're literally turned into a ghost and banished to space. This was tea-time viewing for 6-year-olds. But nothing compared to Nosy Bonk from Jigsaw. This character was supposedly educational, but looked like what would happen if Pennywise and Mr. Blobby had a baby. White mask, giant nose, couldn't speak, just made horrible gestures. There's an entire generation of Brits who still can't look at white masks without flashbacks. The real controversy? Saturday morning TV was a battlefield. ITV had Tiswas, anarchic, messy, working class, while BBC had multicoloured swap shop, organised, educational, middle class. Which one you watched said everything about your family. Tiswas featured kids getting covered in water and custard pies. Try getting that past health and safety now. Here's something that'll blow American minds. Britain had a more advanced home computer gaming scene than the US in the early 80s. While you were playing Pac-Man on Atari, British bedrooms were basically Silicon Valley outposts. The controversy? Educational. Parents bought BBC Micros thinking their kids would learn programming. Instead, we learned to pirate games. Every school had that one kid who could crack copy protection, and they were treated like digital drug dealers. Teachers turned a blind eye because half of them were getting copies too. But the arcade scene was mental. Unlike American arcades in malls, British arcades were in seaside towns and were basically training grounds for the criminal underworld. Cigarette smoke so thick you could barely see the screens, fruit machines next to Space Invaders, and always some dodgy bloke trying to sell you imported games that definitely fell off the back of a lorry. The 80s British music scene wasn't just about the music, it was about picking a side. You were either a new romantic, Duran Duran, Spandau Ballet, or you were into two-tone, The Specials' Madness. This wasn't just musical preference, it determined everything from your haircut to your political views. The real controversy? Top of the Pops. This weekly music show was required viewing, but parents had no idea what their kids were being exposed to. Frankie Goes to Hollywood singing about relax. banned by the BBC for sexual content, Dead or Alive's Pete Burns traumatising conservative families, and don't get me started on the acid house movement that started creeping in by 1988. But here's the maddest part. We recorded these shows on cassette tapes by holding a tape recorder up to the TV speaker. The DJ would talk over the beginning and end of songs, ruining our recordings, and we'd have to wait weeks for them to play our favourite song again. Kids today with their Spotify will never understand the dedication required to make a decent mixtape in 1985. The music tribes went deeper than just fashion. If you were a goth, you shopped at specific markets, dyed everything black with Dylon, and spent weekends at the Batcave in London. Mods rode Vespers and fought with rockers at seaside towns. Yes, in the 1980s, we were still recreating conflicts from the 1960s. The casuals emerged from football terraces, wearing expensive European sportswear that they'd acquired on away trips to the continent. What Americans might not realise is how political British music was. The Smiths weren't just moaning. Morrissey was writing anthems for Thatcher's dispossessed youth. The Specials' Ghost Town hit #1 while actual riots burned across Britain in 1981. When Band Aid released Do They Know It's Christmas? In 1984, it wasn't just charity, it was a political statement about African famine that the government was ignoring. The underground was even more mental. Illegal warehouse raves started in 1987, with kids breaking into abandoned buildings to dance to Acid House. The infamous Summer of Love in 1988 saw thousands of kids discovering ecstasy and house music simultaneously. Parents thought their kids were at scout camp. They were actually in a field near the M25, off their faces on pills that nobody really understood yet. The government was so terrified they passed laws specifically banning repetitive beats. Imagine trying to legislate against a type of rhythm. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of growing up in 80s Britain was the sheer freedom we had. We'd leave the house at 9 a.m. on Saturday and our parents wouldn't expect us back until dark. No mobile phones, no GPS trackers, just a vague promise to be careful. We played on building sites, explored abandoned factories, and built dens in places that were definitely contaminated with asbestos. The rule was simple. If you're not bleeding profusely or unconscious, you're fine. This wasn't neglect, it was normal parenting. This freedom created a generation that was simultaneously tough as nails and completely unprepared for the health and safety-obsessed world that followed. We learned to assess risk by actually taking risks, to solve problems without adult intervention, and to create our own entertainment from literally nothing. But here's what modern parents can't grasp. The entire community was inadvertently watching us. We thought we were invisible, but Mrs. Jenkins at number 42 saw everything and wasn't afraid to grass you up to your mum. The milkman, the postman, the lollipop lady, they all knew who you were and where you lived. Get caught scrumping apples. Your parents would know before you got home. We had territories that would make gang members jealous. The woods behind the estate, the wasteland near the railway, the abandoned factory. Each had its own rules and hierarchies. Older kids taught younger ones which mushrooms were poisonous, how to build fires without burning down the forest, and the exact distance you could ride your bike into the quarry without dying. This knowledge was passed down like ancient wisdom. The controversial bit, we were basically feral, and it was brilliant. Broken bones were badges of honour. That kid who fell through the greenhouse roof, legend. The girl who built a zip line across the canal, absolute hero. We'd come home covered in cuts, bruises and tetanus-inducing rust, and our parents would just say, "Don't get blood on the carpet." Today you'd have social services involved if your kid came home looking like we did every single day. But that freedom taught us resilience, creativity, and actual life skills that no amount of supervised playdates could replicate. Growing up in 1980s. Britain was like living in a bizarre social experiment where health and safety hadn't been invented yet. Technology was simultaneously primitive and revolutionary, and children were basically treated like small, indestructible adults. We survived on a diet of E-numbers and questionable meat products, entertained ourselves with genuinely dangerous activities, and somehow emerged as functioning adults. Well, mostly functioning. We still can't see a white mask without thinking of Nosy Bonk. The truth is, while it might sound like we're describing some post-apocalyptic nightmare to modern parents, most of us look back on those days with genuine fondness. Yes, it was sometimes brutal, often unfair, and definitely unsafe by today's standards. But it was also magical in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who didn't live it. We weren't bubble-wrapped or helicopter parented. We learned that actions had consequences because we experienced those consequences firsthand. We developed imagination because we had to. There were only 4 TV channels and they stopped broadcasting at midnight. Would we want our own kids to grow up the same way? Probably not. But are we grateful we did? Absolutely. So there you have it, growing up in 1980s, Britain in all its glorious, chaotic, slightly toxic splendour. If this video brought back memories, or trauma, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I'll be diving into more specific aspects of 80s British life in upcoming videos, including the infamous school disco fights, why British kids were obsessed with sticker albums, and the truth about what really went on during those school trips to France. Until next time, keep those memories alive. Just maybe don't try to recreate them.